part 3 of the overview of parallel functional programming with Java and Android. Let's talk about how do you set up Java and the Android Studio IDE, and how do you set up GitLab, and how do you access Android and Java source code if you need it, which you may or may not need it in this course, but it's nice to know where to find it if you do need it. So to use Android, you need to install the latest version of Android Studio, which is Android Studio Giraffe. So please make sure you update. It's usually very simple to update if you've already got it installed from a previous semester. Or if you've never got it before, you just go to this link, and it'll give you some options for setting things up. And it's typically smart enough to know what kind of platform you're using, what kind of operating system. And so that'll get it downloaded and installed. So you download it and install it, Giraffe version. Then you go into the Android Studio SDK Manager, and you select Android 13 API level 33. Which is this guy, Tiramisu. Then you want to create an Android 33 emulator. Now, if you're very fortunate and you have a brand new Android phone that supports API 33, which you may or may not have, you can use that too, but the emulator is probably good enough, and it works fairly well. So select that and choose 33. You should also try to see if you can use the hardware accelerator or virtualization enhancements that they have. This typically just works out of the box. On some environments, you may have to do some extra stuff, but that will make your life much easier because it makes the emulator actually usable. If you don't have this support, it's kind of very slow, but most modern versions of hardware support these types of acceleration modes. Setting up GitLab. This is probably the very first thing you need to do, and we will give you a little bit of help for this, but we're really expecting you can do this, and there's certain things that always trip people up, so I'll try to go over them. So, by the way, the GitLab interface has changed a tiny bit, but this is the basic idea. You go to GitLab. You may already have something set up there, but if you don't, go to GitLab, register, sign in, create a project, and you want to call it CS253, CS-253-fall-2023. Very, very, very important that you name it this, because we have automated ways of being able to get your projects as long as you name them in things that we're expecting. And then you'll go ahead and it'll tell you that you successfully created it. It's going to be initially empty. You can clone it and do other things to get it onto your repository. Now, you want to make certain people maintainers. And if you take a look at the Piazza posting that I put up, it's pinned at the very top. It says, welcome to CS253. It tells you who to make a maintainer. You make me the maintainer. You make the grader, Celia Fu, or Zihan Fu. And you also make Skylar Grandel, who's the TA, a maintainer. Why do you do that? So we can see your project code and push things back and forth, comments and grades and so on, but nobody else can. So that's what that is for. And then you'll go ahead and set the visibility. Make sure it should default to private. Make sure it stays private. You don't want to make it public. That would be a big problem. And then what you're going to do is the following. So after you've created your GitLab repo, you're then going to go onto your local machine, and you're going to find a place to put it. I recommend putting it kind of up towards the top of your file system for various things having to do with path link issues. And you want to do a git clone of this name. And I think I have this in my welcome message on Piazza. So you're going to say clone, and you want to basically clone your repository with your name from this, which is what you should have created on the website for you. So you're going to go ahead and make that repository locally on your computer, and then you CD into it, you change directory into it, whatever that means on your computer. And once you're there, then you're ready to do the next step. Now, first thing to remember, when you set up GitLab, you need to make sure that you set up your SSH key. One of the most common mistakes people make when they first do this is they forget to set the SSH key, or they do it improperly, and then they get really weird errors, and it says, I can't clone, I can't do this, I can't do that. I would say 99% of the time that's what's wrong. So make sure you remember that, and there's a link here that explains how to do this. Okay, so at this point, now what you're going to do is, now that you've CD'd into your local directory, you're going to type this command, git remote add skeletons, and then you're going to give my GitHub repository URI. And what that's going to do is that's going to go ahead and make a connection between your repository and my repository. Now, just to clarify things, the changes you make and the things you push to your repository are going to stay in your repository. You're not going to give them back to me. you're going to put them back in your repository. You can't push to my repository. That would be chaos and insanity. So then you're going to go ahead and do a git pull skeletons main, which should go to my repository and pull in the projects that are there. Now, it'll start out with directories like assignment 1 or whatever we call them. And over time, as you do this process for each new assignment, you'll end up with different names in your folder. So that's what it should look like. So what you want to be able to do is you basically want to have a mirror in your local repository of my repository's project structure. And that way, when you're done with doing your work, so you do work by making changes to your local repository, then you commit, which commits them to your local repository, and then when you push them back to your repository, which is this thing over here, that'll go back up into the cloud in GitLab, and then you will have a structure that resembles my structure, but it'll be in your GitLab account, not in my GitHub account. So that's basically the idea of how things work. Now, I recommend, like they always say, about voting in Chicago, vote early, vote often, right? So push early, push often. And why you do want to do that? Because inevitably, someone will spill coffee on your computer, or you'll lose it, or it'll go into the shop, or whatever. And if you're pushing your code to your repository, then it's up in the cloud, safe and sound, in case something goes awry with your local workspace, for whatever reason. So just good cyber hygiene to deal with. There's a summary of this at item 13 in the wiki page. So if you ever forget, you can go there. There's also some nice descriptions in the wiki that talk about how to use Git and dealing with merge conflicts and so on. There's a nice article one of my students wrote at one point that I have kept around because it's a useful primer and tutorial. Now, it's also possible, if you're so inclined, to get access to the Java and Android source code. You can get Android source code at this link if you want to browse it. You can also download it at this link, which is really fun and very instructive. You can also browse Java source code, and you can download Java source code. So there's different ways to get access to Java source code. I like looking at Java source code. That's just me. It's got lots of really, really cool patterns in it, and you can learn a lot by seeing it. We're not going to spend a lot of time in this class talking about the details of how things work under the hood, with perhaps one exception. We will spend a little time talking about how Java parallel streams works under the hood, and a little bit about how the fork join framework works under the hood. But this is mostly just for your educational experience and to grow your awareness of what's out there. It's really quite interesting. And all of it's open source at this point and has been for many years. The latest version, I think, is version 20. Version 21 is probably coming down the pipeline pretty soon because they come out about every 6 months or so. OK, so that's the end of part 3 of our overview.